Marcus, your papers are still rattling, so I don't know whether you want to mute or not.
No, I want all to hear my papers rattling.
It's his knee that's rattling.
Good evening. Welcome to this Scrutiny Committee meeting of Burnley Borough Council on the 7th of December 2020. Scrutiny Committee members in attendance are Councillor Andy Tatchell, Chair of Scrutiny, Councillor Marcus Johnson, Vice Chair. Also in attendance are Councillors Baker, Campbell, Commis, Ferry, Fewings, Councillor Gordon Lishman, Councillor Margaret Lishman, Councillors Lone, Martin, Newhouse and Townley. Members of the Council's executive are also present. Leanne Pate, Deputy Leader and Portfolio Holder for Health and Wellbeing, Councillor John Harbour, Portfolio Holder for Housing, and Councillor Sue Graham, Portfolio Holder for Resources. Officers present in the meeting are Lukman Patel, the Chief Operating Officer of the Council, Ingram, Head of Economy and Growth, Howard Hamilton-Smith, Head of Finance and Property, Simon Goff, Head of Green Spaces and Amenities, Rob Dobson, Head of Policy and Engagement. Also present are Richard Brown, Community Safety Officer, and Elizabeth Murphy, Planning Policy Officer. The Democracy Officer is Christine Wood, and Alison McEwen, Democracy Officer, is streaming the meeting, and Chris Gay, Government Manager, is hosting the meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, Chair. Can I
Thank you,
just
Chris.
can I just say, have I already just had a senior moment? I don't think I heard my name being mentioned there. Did anybody else?
Right, apologies, B, I can confirm that you're here.
Sorry, say that again, Chris.
Yes, apologies, B, I can confirm that you're here.
Right, thank you.
As well, also councillors Shona Khan, Lorraine Horner and Will are not present in the meeting.
That's correct, Christine. Apologies have been received from Councillor Mahana, Councillor Shabana Khan.
Right, well, I'm just about to open the meeting.
Thank you.
I noticed the council leader's just joined us as well. Item 1, it looks like we've just dealt with that. Apologies, so we'll...
Excuse me, apologies, Chair, from Councillor Shaw. In addition to...
Sorry, Christine, your signal is breaking up. Apologies to Councillor Anne Royal, Councillor Ray Mahana and Councillor Shabana Khan, Chair.
Thank you, thank you. Item 2... Sorry. Item 2, minutes of the previous remote meetings held on the 9th of October, 19th of October, 22nd of October and 11th of November. We have been extremely busy. See, can I take those minutes as a true record?
Move those, Chair.
Getting thumbs up.
Second, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, item 3, additional items of business. I know we've got 2 private items, but I take it that's a no.
Per agenda, Chair.
Item 4, declarations of interest.
I've declared an interest, Chair, in item 10 in that I am a member of the Burnley Pendle Rossendale CVS, a trustee.
Thanks, Maggie. I think you also read about some other councillor who was.
Yeah.
Was it Leanne? Was it?
Leanne is, and I'm on the Citizens Advice Bureau too.
Okay.
Andy, thank you.
Chair, Ms. Lukman as well.
Can you hear?
On the same item, I'm a trustee and a director at Burnley Football Club in the community. It's not a remunerated position, but I just want to declare another interest, non-prejudicial. Whilst officers don't need to declare, I just wanted to do so in the interest of transparency.
Thanks, Lukman. I think you were good enough to put that out on an email, which I picked up. Thank you.
And I think I should just say that I'm the council rep on the CVS. Don't know whether I should declare that interest or not, really.
Well, we'll record it, B. Thank you.
Thank you.
Item 5, exclusions of the public. That's per agenda, I assume.
Per the agenda, Chair.
20 per agenda.
Public question time. Item 6.
No questions
no.
have been received.
No questions received, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, on to item 7, the public items. Notice of key decisions and private meetings. They've all been published. Any member, actually, I was looking for a play provision report for the decision in December. I don't know if anybody else was interested, but I wondered where that had gone. Perhaps it's been put back into the new year.
It's page 30, Chair.
Yeah,
Review of Burnley's play provision strategy.
I must have missed it when I was going through that belter of
No, December, still December, Chair.
till December, yeah. Okay. Anybody else got anything they want to bring up about the key decisions? I'm getting nothing through.
No, Chair, sorry, no questions relieved, but just also to note that the Chief Executive, Mick Cardledge, has also sent his apologies.
Thank you. That came up. So, okay. Item 8, developer contribution supplementary planning document. Is Kate going to lead on that, or is Elizabeth?
Councillor Tatchell, Elizabeth Murphy will lead on this item.
Fine. Thank you, Elizabeth. Over to you.
Yes, thank you. If you're happy, I'll just do a brief recap of the SPD and where we're up to.
Yes, please.
Yeah. So this is the second in a series of SPDs, supplementary planning documents, being prepared to support the local plan. SPDs can't set entirely new policy, but they can explain how the policies of the local plan will be interpreted and applied. This particular SPD supports 3 key local plan policies: policy HS2, IC4 and IC5, which cover affordable housing, contributions and infrastructure. It's quite a technical SPD and it includes some background on contributions and some procedural advice, but its main purpose is to set out how the affordable housing policy will be applied, how contributions will be prioritised, and how viability is to be taken into account. So just to briefly take those in order, in terms of affordable housing, the SPD sets out the expected levels of provision on or for given site types, including the indicative percentages. It also includes an off-site affordable housing calculator, which we would use to work out the contributions where it's agreed that an affordable housing contribution is better or able to be provided off-site, and that can improve viability. In terms of prioritising, the SPD sets out 2 important categories. The first one is priority 1, and those are matters that are necessary and critical, and the considerations that normally, if in the absence of those contributions, a scheme would be refused. Those are in addition to meeting the local plan requirements. So those would be contributions for open space provision and safe access. The next category is priority 2, which are necessary and important and therefore can be made. They are passing the relevant legal tests, enabling them to be requested. But these are ones where viability can and must be taken into account, and these include affordable housing and education contributions, amongst others. It's important to remember that for any given scheme, the prioritisation may vary, but the SPD sets out a framework to enable that discussion to be undertaken in a more transparent way than it is at present. The reason that we have to prioritise is to ensure that otherwise acceptable schemes remain viable, particularly when those schemes are necessary to deliver the local plan. And prioritising is necessary because one contribution could be at the expense of another contribution, or could result in the reduction of scheme quality. For example, a reduction in design quality or increased density, as that generally improves viability. In terms of assessing viability, which is a particular issue in Burnley, in the past, this has been done by developers at the planning application stage through their own viability assessment. And although developers are still free to do this and have been doing in some cases, national policy now expects viability assessments to be done at the plan level. And we did a viability assessment for our local plan, which was tested through the examination. The purpose of that plan assessment is not to show the results for every individual and conceivable scheme, but to ensure that the overall policies of the plan can be delivered. And the study found that that was the case, but warned that we need to still be flexible, particularly with brownfield sites in terms of other contributions. So the SPD takes that evidence and sets out a series of viability ceilings based on the size, location, and either greenfield and brownfield nature of a site. And being an SPD, these are guidance, but they do provide some clarity when those difficult negotiations do occur, when the scale of contributions is such that the ceiling is likely to be reached. In terms of the SPD itself, it was considered by Executive last December 2019, and as part of its consultation, it was considered by a Scrutiny Committee in January of this year. And the Scrutiny Committee resolved to establish a working group to look at the consultation responses and when they were received. And that working group met on the 22nd of September, and the notes of that group are an appendix to the executive report. In terms of the consultation responses, there wasn't a large number, but there was a useful range of responses, both from the public, from organisations and developers. And some changes have been made to the draft in response, although they've not altered the thrust of the SPD. The most difficult matter to resolve has been in respect of secondary education contributions. And in recent years, the amount of contributions being requested by the County Council have been substantial. And part of the reason that these have been necessary is the decision to close Hambledon College following the opening of the free school, which was obviously in a different location in relation to a number of the local plan sites. Now, the county currently use for calculating secondary education contributions a 3 mile as the crow flies distance. And it became apparent when looking at the Department for Education response to the SPD that that is more rigid than they necessarily recommend. So officers approached the County Council to discuss whether we could have a more flexible approach that recognised the movement of schools within Burnley since the plan was adopted, the viability challenges we face, and the pressure to retain scheme quality. Unfortunately, we couldn't agree with the County Council, who understandably want to have a consistent approach across the part of Lancashire they're responsible for. So what we're proposing in the SPD is to use that 3 mile distance or the borough boundary, whichever is the greater, which just gives us a little bit more flexibility. And that allows some sites to make lesser contributions than would have been the case. For others, it would be unaffected. At the moment, there is capacity at Burnley High School. But at some point, depending on which projections are looked at, that capacity will be exhausted and then contributions will come back into play. I think in review, I would say that it is an SPD, and that allows us to constantly review and update it as circumstances change. It doesn't need to go through the procedure of a local plan. So it is a lot quicker if we determine that facts on the ground have changed or national policy changes, we can review it or we can withdraw it. That's a very brief overview, and I'm happy to answer any questions on either the comments that were made or the content of the SPD.
Thank you for that, Elizabeth. It's a 115-page report. I think you did very well to summarise it so succinctly. I'll take questions from members. Any member?
Councillor Gordon Lishman, Chair. Councillor Gordon Lishman, Chair.
Gordon, you there?
Yeah, it's all right. I'm just going through the unmuting process. I just wanted to make 3 points, 2 on points of detail, 1 more general one. There is reference in the report to the new government white paper and their new proposals. It does seem to me that the new proposals coming from government, even if not fleshed out yet, are going to have a significant effect, not only on this aspect of policy, but on a wide range of others, mainly by taking a great deal of power away from this and other local authorities and centralising it with central government. Now, I realise we have to deal with the situation as it is, although perhaps the amount of time that's spent on it might be questioned if the entire system is likely to change very shortly. But I would ask that the executive should look at those proposed changes and consider asking the council to express an opinion on those, not least so that our residents can see what we think of this central government power grab. My second point is on the LCC response and the education contributions. And I simply wanted to say that the LCC response seemed to me to be deeply unsatisfactory and against the interests of children and parents in Burnley. I don't disagree with the approach which Kate is recommending, but I think it is worth putting on record that we are not happy with the response we've received, and that perforce we will try to do what we can, but that's less than we ought to be able to do. A final detail point, I note the reference to consultation with the clinical commissioning group. It does seem to me, with the changes that are currently taking place with the CCG, that we are reaching a point where the primary care networks in Burnley are more appropriate people to discuss these things with, and may well have a greater role in the near future. Thanks.
Thank you, Gordon. I can see Cosima and Maggie, so Cosima first.
Yeah, it was really just to ask how we intend to enforce should a developer decide that they're not going to make any or such contributions as we would wish, and how we are going to prioritise it, because obviously every development will throw up a different priority table of things that we would prefer them to put contributions towards.
If it's okay with you, Maggie, I'll let Elizabeth come back in and just answer those points that's been made so far.
Yes, thank you. Starting with Councillor Lishman's point, we did do a response to the white paper and pointed out some of those concerns. In terms of the implications, yes, they are far-reaching for the planning system and for planning policy in particular. It's been determined to carry on with this SPD because they can be withdrawn, and it was already under preparation. The decision on whether a local plan review is necessary would wait until the reforms were a little clearer. They will take time to implement, but amongst those reforms is a proposal to completely replace the current system of developer contributions. If that happened, then obviously this SPD would be withdrawn. But we don't know that will happen in the form that it's set out. There is likely to be some reform of developer contributions, and I think most people would welcome that. Councillor Lishman's comments and the LCC response were more of a comment than something for me to come back on. Yes, I do recognise the difficulty in engaging with the clinical commissioning group. Alongside this SPD, we are updating the infrastructure delivery plan, which sort of sits alongside the local plan. It's a live document that we update periodically to look at where we're at with infrastructure to support the plan. And we always have difficulty engaging with the clinical commissioning group. We did engage with them at the stage of the local plan, but it's difficult to get that sort of updated position. So we'll note that perhaps there is a different route to engagement through the primary care network. In terms of Councillor Townley's question, the SPD does set out prioritisation in the table 1 on page 13, and that would be the normal way we would prioritise. So we separate out what's necessary and critical, i.e. those matters which would make the scheme substandard and therefore it should be refused. And then the next priority is priority 2, which includes affordable housing, education and other sort of green infrastructure that's not so critical. And if there is sufficient viability, they should be funded if the requests are robustly made. But we have set out that we would negotiate that, but we'd give a slight preference to affordable housing. And there's a number of reasons for that. One is because of its status in the local plan policy. There is a policy requiring affordable housing to be delivered if it's viable. obviously there's an ongoing need for it, and it delivers a fixed permanent asset for the future. For some of the other things like education, it may be a temporary thing which disappears over time. So I think it's right to prioritise affordable housing, but that doesn't mean to say that the other contributions wouldn't be paid. If viability allows and the requests are justifiably made, then contributions for all of them would be afforded, or a negotiation would take place. But yes, we would still want to retain flexibility, because in any given scheme, it may be that one thing is slightly more important than another to a comparable scheme. So it is important to retain that flexibility.
Thank you. Maggie, you've been waiting.
Thanks, Andy. Two general points. I note from experience with the development in Standon Hall that what happened was the consultation was with the CCG, who didn't go forward and engage with the general practices. And I suppose it's a general point to planning department overall that wherever a development is going to be, if it's a reasonably large development, it's worth engaging with the general practices that are likely to be affected by that development, rather than relying on the CCG. Some of you may all have noticed that there is a degree of reorganisation going on with regard to the health service and regard to social services. And experience teaches me that as soon as you introduce reorganisation, everybody starts focusing on where their next job might be rather than anything else. And that's probably particularly true in the CCGs at the moment, because there is such a flux of change, whereas the local general practice that will be impacted by a housing development tends to always be there. So it's an important thing that we do engage with them early on as a planning department. So I'd like to make that point and that heartfelt request. With regard to the LCC and their view on 3 miles as the crow flies, my instant response is that the majority of bus routes don't go the same way as the crow flies, and therefore it's not really a particularly effective measure to be using in the first instance. My second response is that if the only school with spare capacity at the moment in the borough is the high school, that does rather limit the choice of our residents with regard to where they might want their children to go to school. And I know that both Unity and also Shuttleworth are working on overcapacity at the moment because they've taken in from Habegem, and therefore there is no spare capacity. This is going to be a real issue for this borough, and planning needs to address it as much as LCC does. And I make a plea to the executive and to the leader to start having these discussions, because all of us as councillors will know that as soon as they allocate the schools, once they've done that process, we are inundated with people that don't get the choice that they want. And we don't get the choice because the capacity isn't right at the moment in the borough. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Maggie. I've seen that Luckman wants to come in and help on this particular subject.
Partially on some of the points that Councillor Lishman, Councillor Margaret Lishman raised, and Councillor Gordon Lishman raised something similar in the past. Earlier on in the conversation. The planning department has put in place new procedures just over the last 4 weeks. Actually, we've been having a number of discussions with the PCN directors who are closer to the health impacts in comparison to the CCG, as Councillor Gordon Lishman has correctly pointed out earlier. And as a result, on any large-scale developments, the PCN directors will be consulted, and we have taken relevant details from them for the consultation process. That was it, really, Councillor Tatchell.
Thank you. Councillor Martin, were you trying to get in there? I saw you waving your hand about.
Well, just in reply to Maggie Lishman's comment about Unity, I know they've got planning application in for quite a big build, which has been delayed for some reason. I don't think it's anything to do with us. I think it's down to the ground conditions or whatever. But anyway, the bulk of the students that were coming out of Hambledon are due to go into Unity, and planning permission is being sought or is being granted for that build, and it's due to take place imminently. There was a report to the County Council Cabinet today. I think it was today. It might have been yesterday. Time flies. Discussing the implications of it. But anyway, there it is. It's already been sorted out, hopefully, sooner rather than later.
Thanks for that information, Tony. Any other member? Cosmo's waving hand again.
Thank you, Chairman. I had put an RTS in. Yeah, I can flesh that out. The problem with the Eastern Clough development at Unity is the former mining around it. The ground conditions have proved well, let's say we're having to do further investigations before they can rebuild upon it. So that should alleviate some of that, but I do take the point there. It's just an observation, basically, that in the SPD that I do feel that we are perhaps sacrificing, I know it's a very difficult choice, but sacrificing health and well-being benefits on the whole, where we just put it down to the implement or asking for contributions to green infrastructure. It's much more important than that. It ties into many more of the agendas on the council. And I really do think that we have to, on certain developments, need to put that above some of the other considerations that are there. And are we able to do that?
Thank you, Cosmo. Are there any more to come in, Chris? I'm not picking anybody else up.
None have been raised at this point, Chair, no.
Okay.
Can I just confirm that we're not in that report? The committee is not in that report then?
Not sure what that was.
Christine, we can't hear you. Do you want to use chat? And I can.
I got that. And Christine was asking whether or not the committee would like to note the report.
Thank you. Can I take that as noted?
Noted.
Stick a finger up or do something.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right. That's right. Both fingers out. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. The report is noted. Moving on to item 9, the Safer Streets projects. That's Richard Brown. Are you there, Richard?
I am indeed. Thank you, Chair. Okay. The report that you'll have seen is the report to executive for the Safer Streets project that will be it's going tomorrow night with the purpose of seeking approval for
That's slightly on the quiet side, Richard. If you could either speak up or the microphone.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Is that any better?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. So it's the Safer Streets project, which is Home Office funding. The purpose of the report is to seek approval to start the tendering process on the relevant budgetary contracts which will be issued to deliver some of the works that are detailed within the report. The report itself details some of the work streams, but I'll also give a bit of background on what the Safer Streets fund is and how we've managed to secure £500,000 worth of funding for what's a relatively small part of Burnley. The Home Office announced the availability of the Safer Streets Fund, which is £25 million worth of funding for local authorities to bid in, and has the aim of tackling areas that are suffering from high impact acquisitive crime rates, so domestic burglary, car crime, that kind of thing. The way that the fund has been organised is slightly different to normal in that it's been run through the various police and crime commissioners for each county. So in our case, through Lancashire, and each area had the opportunity to put forward a primary bid and 2 secondary bids. In Lancashire's case, it was 1 primary and 1 secondary bid. After lobbying from the East Lancs Pennine Community Safety Partnership, we managed to put forward Burnley as a proposal, but they used an analytical approach to identify what were the where the bid was going to go, because there was criteria set against the bid, the fund. So that was around recorded crime rates. So just to give a quick indication of those and where they sat in comparison to Burnley's, the benchmark for acquisitive crime, taking an average of 3 years, was 30.38 per thousand population, and recorded number of burglaries was 8.29 per thousand population. Now, the analytical approach that was taken put these two areas right at the top of East Lancashire. So the Rose Hill with Burnley Wood bit, which is the Burnley Wood area, had a 3-year average acquisitive crime rate of 101.59 and 3-year average burglary rate 31.35. And the area of Bank Hall that's been included, so that's the area around Leyland Road, Albert Street, 90.12 and 47.99 respectively. So significantly above the benchmark. And they were, with the exception of 2 town centre areas in Blackburn with Darwin, the highest within East Lancashire. So we were given the opportunity to put forward a bid to cover these 2 areas, which fortunately are adjacent to each other in terms of local super output areas. So at reasonably short notice, we were able to put together a proposal that I think takes a range of, well-established interventions to tackle acquisitive crime within the community. A number of which we've already been doing within Burnley for a number of years and have experience, some on a large scale, some on smaller scales. And we put forward a proposal which includes a number of these. Alongside that, there is proposals around engagement with the community to achieve sustainability in improving these communities and helping them, guarding them against acquisitive crime. Because as I said earlier, the rates compared to the criteria are triple in some areas. So just quickly running through and taking out the main ones. The bulk of the proposal will be around home security improvements. So we'll be working with landlords and owner occupiers to identify households to improve home security. So that'll be actually basic locks, lock packages, improving security on doors, backyard lighting, that sort of thing. In the build-up to putting forward the proposal, an environmental visual audit was undertaken in these areas to really look at sort of what the nature of the areas were. I mean, and it's evident that the vulnerability of these properties is to the rear. So taking a project that had been piloted within Street Scene for a couple of years around improvement of backyard gates, which has been very successful, we intend to roll that out on a much larger scale within the 2 areas to improve the security and the amenity of the area as well. We'll put forward increased alligating within the areas. Burnley Wood already has a number of schemes, but using analytical approach to identify the priority back streets, we'll be rolling out a further 10 schemes. There'll be improvements to CCTV along main arterial routes to improve connectivity to the Pennine Lancashire CCTV hub. There'll be green space improvement to improve the amenity of the area, which is basic broken window signal crime. So by improving the area, a number of green spaces, children's play areas, to sort of improve the general feel of the area. We'll be working community engagement, working with community groups, CVS, Calico, to a number of awareness raising initiatives. Now, obviously, this bid was written back in March prior to prior to the pandemic that we've all experienced. So we've been adapting a number of the proposals that were put forward around community engagement. So that'll be taking a much more digital approach. But there will be working with these community groups to really push home the message around home security and protecting yourselves, and with the aim overall of establishing neighbourhood watch schemes and ownership in terms of protecting the community. There'll be a number of other basic sort of parts of the project around equipment and home security kits to generally hammer home the messages around crime prevention and that sort of thing within the area. There is a project manager who has been taken on board to see this project through to completion, and will be liaising with the Police and Crime Commissioner and the Home Office. And I think really that's a whistle-stop tour of the Safer Streets project.
Thank you, Richard. Very interesting report. I've got Christine who wants to say something. No? Okay. Any member?
No requests to speak received yet.
Okay. Thanks very much, Richard. Seems like everybody likes your report and thinks it's a good idea. Thank you. Item 10.
Yes, through you, Chair.
Sorry?
Through you, I suspect Christine will be asking if scrutiny members agree to note the report.
Yes. I think we can take that as read. Everybody's got the thumb up.
And
Excellent.
effectively, Chair, as all decisions tonight are for the executive, that will be the same position or same request for each item that scrutiny members note the report as presented. And of course,
I'll ask at the end of each debate.
Thank you, Chair.
Cheers. Okay. COVID-19 item 10, COVID-19 Community Recovery Plan. Rob Dobson.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, thank you. So the sad situation that we're in is that we're still in the containment phase of dealing with the pandemic. So the report does make reference to the council's contribution towards the test and trace efforts. It also looks ahead to the vaccination programme, and also in some detail outlines the work of the Burnley Together Hub in providing essential supplies, not just to the clinically extremely vulnerable to help them self-isolate, but also to our most socially vulnerable residents as well. But it really starts to look ahead to community recovery. And I think the way I'd like to summarize it is by saying what we hope to do is make some headway on what are called the wider determinants of health. Things like getting a job, fuel poverty, and social isolation and loneliness. And so what we've learned through the Burnley Together Hub approach is that if we make it as easy as possible for the most vulnerable people in society to access the services that are already available to them, then perhaps we can start to make some headway on some of those really, really difficult issues. So it's a single phone number as the Burnley Together Hub that you can call if you have got a problem. And it's not just, as I say, about providing the immediate support that some people need, such as a food parcel. It's hopefully trying to understand what underlies that need. So what are the root causes that we could perhaps try and tackle, such as debt, for example. The strategy or the plan is funded for the next 12 months through both ring-fence and non-ring-fence government grants that have been provided to the council to help deal with the pandemic. So there's no new budget implication here. And I'm more than happy, of course, Chair, to try and answer any questions that members may have. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. I've nothing coming up. Any member?
Yes, Chair. Councillor Margaret Lift.
Oh, she's waving around. Maggie?
Yes, it should have said me. Thank you, Chair. I do welcome the report. for the obvious reason that I was one of the instigators, so I'd be foolish not to welcome it. I do have a few comments to make, though. Some of the some slight concern about some of the language through it, that it appears very much as though we're doing it to people. And I think one of the things that I've learned through doing the volunteering and the other stuff that we've done through the pandemic is that a lot of the problems that we are seeing through the pandemic have been exacerbated by it, but were there beforehand, and have just got worse as a consequence, and more people have been affected and more people will be affected as the unemployment rates rise and all the other issues. I note the mention of debt that Rob made in his speech, but I couldn't find one within the actual document, and it may be that I didn't read it as carefully as perhaps I might have done. But I think for me the things that came out particularly was we're not mentioning homelessness in it, and I know we've got a homeless strategy, but if you're doing a community recovery strategy, then you ought to do all of the things that we're doing, not just concentrate on the bits that fit at that point. So the homeless strategy and those elements should be in there. Equally, domestic abuse, if you look at the rates that have increased through the pandemic and through lockdown, particularly when people are unable to get away, that is another fundamental area, as is the debt that he did mention, as I say, through the process. But when you're looking at community recovery, I wonder whether we ought to be including some of the work like the Safer Streets stuff that are going in, because that's part of the community recovery as well. And it's a document that is all encompassing. I think I'd also like to have seen perhaps something more about volunteering and the way communities have started to work together, and to some extent the way some communities have fractured as a consequence of the pandemic, and how we're going to look at that, because there are very clear communities. I always think of Burnley in some ways is a lot of different villages rather than one whole thing. Padiham regards itself very much as a very integrated community, and believe me, Harsyke, Briarcliff, if we could have a border, we'd have one. So, you know, and I think that's probably equally true of other areas. And I think we ought to be looking at community, at neighbourhood areas. And the thing about volunteers and volunteering is, for a lot of people, it's a way into work in the future and regaining confidence. And we ought to be playing on that element as well. The other thing is a side sort of point, but it's something that niggles at me. And we talk about the hub being the partnership. And about 2 or 3 days ago, we had Pastor Fleming and his colleague on the television, and they've done a wonderful fundraising as a consequence. But are they integrated into the hub? Are they all working together? Are the people that go to them being able to take advantage of the services that we know we can work across in the hub? And if not, how do we make that happen? So I think at the moment, that's all I want to say. Thank you, Chair.
Before I bring Rob back, I'll just, because it's written all over Beat's face, she wanted to come in there, and I know you've had your hand up. Bea, do you want to come in next?
In agreement with what Maggie was saying, because I have been to some of these activities that Pastor Mick does run outside the library to try to do that linking up. And as I've talked around the homeless project, that is what I've kept saying, that we need a designated person to do that linking up, who is on the ground doing it. So that's all. But there were other things I wanted to comment on this report, really. Again, like Councillor Lishman, I find it really, really good and really helpful. But a couple of things. On page 162, I was really glad where Rob said there were really 2 levels now. The immediate level of food parcels, etc., will still be going on, but then we're looking at a much deeper level And for me, our challenge around that is about having the same people in there dealing with the same person. Because what often happens with these situations, and I understand because of the staffing situation, but a person who has complex needs has to retell their story 100 times, and by the time they've told it the 100th time, they've had enough and they walk away. So I don't know how we can overcome that challenge, but if we're really serious about moving forward with the complex issues of debt, etc., homelessness, then we do need in the same people dealing with it as much as possible, really. And then on page 164, you do mention about establishing a mental health support officer. I just wanted to well, is that going to happen? Because the way it's said in the report, I couldn't work out whether it definitely is going to happen or not, really, because that's a really good thing. And then, of course, on 165 towards the bottom, you do talk of what Maggie has just raised, really, and that is that our service today is customer informed, but it would be much more powerful and sustainable if it was customer owned and driven. And I just maybe like to, I suppose I'm putting you on the spot here, Rob, in a way, in the sense of how are we thinking of that will be achieved? What are we trying? What strategies are we putting in place for that to happen, really? And then I suppose under 168, under the community and inclusion one, again, those are all really good things, but it's about how we're moving these forward. So I think the plan is good, but it just needs more detail on it about how these things are going to come about and happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody waiting, Chris, or can I bring Robin to answer those?
There is, Chair, Councillor Gordon Lishman.
Okay, well, I'll just take Gordon and then you can come back in, Rob. Gordon?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I apologise for the proportion of time that my household is taking up in this meeting, but I did want to make some, I think, quite important points about the proposals here. The first is really to emphasise how far the background that Rob is talking about is a pretty grim picture of our short-term future in Burnley. And there is specific reference to potentially 35% youth unemployment. Looking at wider trends, it's clear that there are several other groups of key likely losers in the pandemic. One is women with young children, who are disproportionately likely to have lost jobs and disproportionately not to be trying to get back into the labour market during the period of the pandemic for reasons that are reasonably obvious. But in terms of the stress we're talking about, increases in levels of poverty and debt, that is another key group who are going to be hit by it. The other group, however, are people who are going to be suffering in the longer term, and that I think is also reflected in what Rob is saying, but perhaps needs to be drawn out a little more strongly. What we've seen during periods of recession is so-called scarring. That is to say, an effect on certain groups of people that can continue for the whole of the rest of their lives. That happened generally during the 1980s recession and to some extent in the 2008 recession. During the 1980s, we had some problems which are similar to those which I think we're going to face, which is a much greater local and regional impact of the recession. So it's not going to be even around the country, it is going to be stronger in some areas than others, and areas which are dependent upon manufacturing in general and on aerospace manufacturing in particular are high in that list. And those are also the areas which will have the greatest impact from Brexit, whatever now manages to happen over the course of the next few days. If we're going to respond to that scarring, it's about how we can help job creation in the first place, which does appear in Rob's report in terms of helping with education and skills development amongst young people. It's also looking in economic terms at the wider transition that's going to take place from one sort of economic activity to other sorts of economic activity. One of the long-term changes is the move away from retail, for instance, and towards hospitality. We can see that that is already happening, and that needs, I think, a coherent response in terms of how we deal with it. I want to make a very strong point in support of what Rob is saying about the wider determinants of health. And we know that the greatest victims of recession, or the greatest victims of all the changes that happen in people's lives, arise from unemployment, a lack of control over the things that are happening in your life, and of course then also the other things that have already been mentioned that arise from family and other relationships. How we address that, and I think what Rob said was stronger perhaps than some of what's in the report, but how we address that is about finding ways of looking at those wider determinants and their implications. And as a sign of age, but as one who was involved in community development programs in the 60s and 70s in particular, I would strongly recommend that we look at the communities we already have and how we can encourage and enable them to support other people in their communities. Part of that is also addressing issues in schools. One of the things that happened in the 1980s, which still scars Burnley, was a period in which poverty of aspiration affected both parents and children. And we do not want the future of our children, some of us grandchildren, to be adversely affected by the effect of those sorts of changes. So that means going into schools, it means talking up the possibilities for aspiration. It also means helping that group of people who are losing jobs, not just because a firm is temporarily contracting, but because they're closing. And again, the economic evidence is that it will take longer for those changes to take place and for employment to recover. And that's not just about helping people, therefore, with job applications. It's about helping them during potentially quite protracted periods of unemployment, which will affect some people who live in our town considerably more than others. One final point, which is really picking up on the earlier 10-point plan that was about recovery, both economic and social. There's the observatory linked to Burnley Together. I feel really strongly that that observatory ought to be charting, particularly the changes which will lead to greater inequality within Burnley and between Burnley and other parts of the country. And charting those changes, charting that increasing inequality, needs to be part of the wider message that we're putting across for the extra support that we're going to need from government and other places to come through the next recession. Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon. This is not an easy subject. Back to you, Rob. Can you respond to those comments, please?
Thanks, Chair. I won't answer the individual points, but I'll try and sum up what will be happening next and how I believe that will deal with some of the points that the members have raised. So the governance that will sit around the hub, well, we're due to have the first steering group meeting this week. And underneath that, we have three thematic groups, one looking at our most vulnerable residents, social isolation, another looking at health and well-being more broadly, and another one looking at jobs and skills. Now, what I believe will happen is that we'll start to look at some of the detailed, what we always refer to as the pathways for people. So what's the pathway for a young job seeker? What's the pathway for someone that's on the verge of being homeless? What's the pathway for someone that's a victim of domestic abuse or is about to fall into debt? And once we understand where people are on that pathway and what the causes are that got them down that road on the first place, we can hopefully start to tackle them through the groups through strategies that these groups are going to develop in more detail. And specifically, it is about putting answering a key point made by Councillor Foster, it is about putting dedicated members of staff on these issues so that they fully understand that pathway and how services can make a contribution towards a better outcome for individuals, but also how they join up those different pathways. So if someone is about to experience homelessness, then is the underlying cause alcohol addiction or debt? And therefore, what services do we need upstream? Again, more of the jargon to try and tackle that. To give you an indication, the DWP is going to be appointing new advisors to support our young people who are looking for opportunities to get into the workplace. The council is going to put some money into a new officer that will be full-time on the hub, dealing with some of the most vulnerable residents out there and getting to the bottom of what their needs are. Calico has just appointed somebody to look at some of the social isolation issues. So the resources are starting to come into place, and then we'll start to really work on some of these issues over the next few months. So perhaps if you agree, Chair, we will bring a report back to Scrutiny in, say, 6 months' time to give a more detailed update on the progress that's been made and some of the issues that we've uncovered, and to try and answer in detail some of the questions that Councillors Lishman and Foster have raised. So I've made a note of those and I'll be feeding those into the various groups.
I think that's an extremely good idea, Rob, and we all thank you for the hard work that you're doing on this. Can I take it that we note Rob's report and actually take on board his willingness to come back and keep us up to date with it? Thank you very much, Rob. Okay, moving on to item 11. I'm assuming this is you again, Rob. Resident Satisfaction Survey 2020.
It is. Thanks, Chair. What I always do when I present a satisfaction survey is caveat it. So this is not a scientific survey. The sample is reasonable. We had well over 700 responses, and the coverage of the community in Burnley is pretty good. But it wouldn't be considered very robust if you were a professional or in Mori or a social scientist. So I always advise members to have a look at the report and see if it resonates, and does it fit with the things that you know about your local community, about what your constituents are telling you, and from other data that you have about council services. So it sounds like I put rather a downer on the report straight away, and that's not my intention, because I do think it's incredibly useful. So what have we learned? Well, I'll highlight a couple of key sections. One is, in the survey we provide the opportunity for residents to just tell us what they think. So it's not tick box, it's tell us the top 3 things about living in the borough and tell us about the top worst things about living here. Now, when you look at the worst things, I don't think there'll be any surprises there for anybody. It's the usual things. Maybe one of those that was highlighted was around the road network, which, given all the roadworks that have been going on over the last 12 months, is perhaps not surprising. But of course, litter and social behaviour, we would probably, unfortunately, expect to see those in this survey. One of the things that was perhaps new, well, is new, was the number of people, unprompted, that said the town centre is a good thing about Burnley. And in the past, that was always in the negative column. It's been a focus of this council for many years to do to help the town centre, and hopefully that is now starting to be seen by residents. Another thing I'd like to highlight, whilst we saw positive directions of travel in most areas, satisfaction seemed to increase when you compare with the previous year. One service area that's seen a real step change is the waste collection and recycling service. Satisfaction has clearly increased very much, and and hopefully the reasons for that are obvious to members, but that's a really, really positive result. So there's plenty in the report, but those are my highlights, Chair. So I'll hand back to the committee and answer any questions as best I can. Thank you.
Any member?
None received, Chair. B is waving a hand now, Chair.
Oh, B's waving a finger at me. Okay,
Takes
B.
me a moment or two, doesn't it? Okay. Just on page 175, I note under, and I understand under the methodology why we've had to do it the way we've done it at the moment because of COVID through social media and council's website. I was surprised. Have I missed somewhere because the Burnley Citizens panel no longer exists? Has that? I don't know how long that has been or anything, but I just wondered about people who aren't on social media and access to the website and stuff. And maybe in future years when we can get back to a new normal, the community centres could be used where people could go in and do a questionnaire in different community centres to get people who may not be able to do social media. Thank you.
Sounds an extremely good idea. We'll get Rob's view on that. Councillor Fewings first, Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. It's just in relation to the satisfaction of recycling service. It's great to hear that that's gone up. When we passed the recycling review changes, it was a strong recommendation that that was on the basis that there would be a consultation and we would revisit which houses are being left out of the scheme. And I've not seen anything about that. And I just wonder when that consultation is going out and when that review is happening. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else before I bring Rob back in?
No requests, Chair.
Okay, Rob, back to you.
So in response to Councillor Foster, we have in the past left paper surveys in various community settings, but the take-up tends to be very low. One of the reasons we moved away from the panel was it became in the correct sense, but very biased, because we would engage with the citizens panel on a fairly regular basis. They would understand what the council services were all about, and it tended to be older people. So we hardly got anybody under the age of 40 that would stay on the panel, and we had to visit that and make sure that we were reaching out to a more representative sample. The main reason, though, I have to say, was the cost. So it postage, printing, what have you. Unfortunately, it costs for the. I think I worked out a few years ago about £10 per response if you use a paper-based survey, whereas it's costing, well, pence for online. But that's not to say that we shouldn't do it. What I would say is that we do take a targeted approach to how we consult with people, depending on what the issue is. So the resident satisfaction survey is just one way of gathering some information about council services. But depending on the topic they want to really engage with people with, we will absolutely reach out to people, do more face-to-face work with people, and increasingly, obviously, when life gets back to normal, that's how we will be conducting our consultation exercises. Regards Councillor Fewing, we had originally discussed with the executive at the time doing public consultations in the spring. So because obviously of the pandemic, we've not been able to do that. And also street scene in particular have been an integral part of our COVID response. So it's something that I'll take back into the council, and we'll put a date on it, and it hasn't been forgotten about. And it's clear that where we can get residents where it's practical to do so on the wheel bin scheme, we'll see an improvement in satisfaction, because it clearly is a preference for people that have the space for a wheel bin. So I'll take that back in, Councillor Fewing, and speak to street scene colleagues about that.
Thank you, Rob. Can we take it then that there are no other members want to come in, and that we note Rob's report. You're all nodding at me. Moving on then to item 12, quarter 2 performance report 2020-21. I think that's yourself again, Rob, or Catherine, is she playing a part?
Yep, I'll take this, please, Chair.
Okay.
So this is the mid-year performance report. Generally, despite COVID, service levels have been sustained very well. Just on the first indicator that's reported there around staff sickness absence, the situation at year end may look different because clearly the numbers of cases in the wider population have been seen also amongst council staff. So we'll have to see whether or not the target of 6 days per employee is achieved at year end. But we were certainly on target at the end of Q2, which is positive. Another highlight is going back to bins. So the benchmark is for 55, just 55 bins per 100,000 collections to be missed. Now, in the last year, since we changed the waste and recycling collection methodology in some neighbourhoods, we do count any report of a missed bin within this data. The reasons for that are clearly if you're on a wheeled bin recycling collection and 3 or 4 weeks passes between collections, we don't want to assume that it's the fault of the resident and we're not going to collect it, and it might be 8 weeks before you get your bin collected. So we treat, regardless of whether or not someone forgot or not, we'll include it in this report, and we get the crews out there to get round and collect the bins. So the number there of 72 per 100,000 collections is over the target of 55, but hopefully that explains one of the reasons why that is. The other is the crews have been dealing with a significant increase in tonnage, presumably because more people are at home, online deliveries, all those Amazon cardboard boxes. But as we've already seen, resident satisfaction with the service is very, very high. And we've been very fortunate in Burnley in that every service in waste and recycling has continued unaffected throughout the pandemic. And for some other local authorities, they have had to stop some of those services in dealing with staff absences, etc. But that's not been the case in Burnley, I'm pleased to report. So those are a couple of the highlights. And again, Chair, I'll hand back to members for any questions. Thanks.
Thanks, Rob. Any member on the quarter 2 performance report?
No requests received, Chair.
Okay, will members note the report? Thank you. Everybody's nodding. Thanks a lot, Rob. And that's you now. Item 13, Revenue Monitoring Report 2020-21, quarter 2 to the 30th of September. That's Howard.
Yeah, I'll take that.
Howard.
Thank you. Okay, so this is the second revenue monitoring report for the year, and this is based on actual spending and income up until the 30th of September. So the council is currently projecting a net overspend of 118,000, which is a big improvement on the last quarter, and that's after taking into account around £1.1 million, and that's estimated to be received through the sales fees and charges income compensation scheme. And the council is also projecting an estimated deficit of around 1.2 million on the collection fund for the year. Now, in the spending review, the Chancellor announced that the government will cover at 75% of irrecoverable losses on business rates. So we're due to receive further information on that in the provisional budget settlement, and that should be later on this month. The government awarded the council 920,000 in tranche 4 of funding, and we're requesting this report that's placed into a newly created COVID-19 reserve, and that will be called upon for additional items of expenditure, losses of income, and it will help through the recovery process as well. It could be used for that. It's also proposed that the council waive the service level agreement charge to Burnley Leisure of 257,000. Now, this reflects the fact that Burnley Leisure have not been able to make full usage of the service level agreement this year, and that's due to the majority of its staff being placed on furlough during the mandated closure of its facilities. However, the council can recover 184,000 of this through the sales fees and charges income compensation scheme. Those are the main points in the report, Chair. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Howard. Any member? Maggie,
Councillor
got her
Margaret
hand up?
Lishman, Chair.
It's not really a question, it's a comment. And I think this report for Q2 and the difference with the report for Q1 shows just how fluid the situation is at the moment. And heaven knows, I don't think Howard does or any of the rest of us, what it's going to look like by Q3. But I think to have got to a position where it's only an overspend of 118 is commendable, and I think that's good. I think it's perfectly reasonable with in relation to the service level agreement for Burnley Leisure Trust, and I think putting the 920k into a COVID-19 reserve is an extremely prudent move for the council to take at this stage in the process. So thank you, Chair. That's really all I wanted to say. As I say, it seems to be a very movable feast this year.
Thank you, Maggie. I must admit, thought I was looking at a bigger figure. I've got Gordon as well, but Howard's got his finger up. So
I've got my finger up because I can't
That's
find the
all right.
button, Andy.
We'll take Howard and then Gordon.
It's just a point, Maggie. It does look a lot better than Q1, but it's still 118 worse than Q1's projected figure. So it's not a massive change. We've still got Q1 in these results for the forecast end of the year, and it's gone another bit worse. So it's not a swap around. That's all I wanted to remark.
Okay, that's noted. Gordon, do you want to come in?
Yes, I was just contemplating actually the concept of Howard Baker as the meat in a Lishman sandwich. But just one very specific point about the longer term effect on domestic rates of the likelihood of the loss of businesses. That's a real risk over the course of the next year or two and will clearly significantly affect our income. I accept entirely that Howard can't forecast on that basis. It does seem to me that it's a point in terms of risk management and potentially in terms of financial modelling, looking over the next few years and the impact which that significant loss of businesses could have on our overall income.
Thank you. Howard, did you want to respond?
Yeah, please. So just to Councillor Baker's point, the 118,000 deficit is the estimate at the end of the financial year. So the position has improved massively. So we're just looking at 118,000 as the deficit at this stage. To Councillor Lishman, I absolutely agree. It is something that we're having to keep under review and model on a continual basis. And we do get bits of information from the government from time to time. We're due to get some more in the provisional budget settlement, hopefully in the next week or two. And that should give us some more information on the levels of discounts and relief that the government are going to grant to businesses going forward, which I think is quite important given the level of support they've had this year. To suddenly withdraw that support, I think would cause businesses quite a few issues going forward. But it is something we're going to keep under review and model on a constant basis. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Howard. Any other members to come in, Chris?
None have requested, Chair, and none are waving hands.
Okay, so can we take that? It's noted by the committee?
Chair,
I'll wave my
Councillor
hand and
Baker.
apologise, Chair. I was wrong. I do apologise, Howard. Hamilton Smith, that one. Howard number 1. I apologise.
I must start calling you 1 and 2 again.
And 2 again, yeah. You know, I know my place.
Which one's 1, but anyway. So we note the revenue monitoring report. Onto the capital monitoring report 2020-21.
Yeah.
ending on 30th of September. That's Howard again. Howard 1, I think we'll call him.
Thank you, Chair. Yep, this report is the second report of the year, and as you say, it goes up to the 30th of September. So we're recommending a reduction of £2.2 million on the existing capital budget, and that will bring it down to 16.9 million. The main reasons for these are 4 schemes in particular. The £609,000 reduction on the Paddy THI scheme, 618,000 on the Lower St James's Street, 500,000 on building infrastructure work, and 300,000 on better care grants. Now that's not a reduction, just it's a reprofiling of those budgets. So those budgets will get reprofiled into the next financial year. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Okay. Any member?
Councillor Baker indicating, Chair.
Howard 2 has his hand up.
Yeah, Howard 2. Not so much of a question of what you're talking about, but I noticed on the Lower St James's Street, we put in some nice big black slabs and things like that to match up with highest or Lower St James, whatever the other St James's Street. But at the bottom of Manchester Road, some of these black things are cracked very badly already. Can we take the opportunity while we have people on site to actually replace the odd ones that look severely broken? Because it's starting to look a bit shabby now. And the bit outside Burton's, if I can advertise, or Dorothy Perkins, depending whether you're a man or a lady, I suppose. If you look at them across the road there, where the bollards are, they're just too big crack now. Whether it's because of levies passing over them, I don't know. But if we've got the stuff on site, because it will disappear, well, the stuff at the end of this, I'm sure. So thank you, Chair.
I suspect that's a question for someone else.
It is, yes, Chair. I'll raise it with the budget holder with that one to see what can be done.
Thanks, Howard. Thank you. Any other questions, Chris?
No, Chair, none
No?
received.
Okay. So can we have agreement that we note the item 14? Thank you. Item 15, fees and charges tariff 2021-22. Amy to present.
Sorry, Chair, I'll take this one again.
Do it, Howard, right? Okay.
Yeah, I'll take this one. Yeah, so this is just to inform members of the proposed fees and charges for the next financial year. So we're proposing an increase of 2.5% to take effect from the 1st of April 2021. So the main fees and charges to note where we deviate from this are included in the report. So those are the garden waste collection charges. So we're looking at increasing those from £30 to £35. We will still provide an early bird payment for the first 8 weeks where people can still pay at £30. And then after that period, the £35 charge will kick in. The building control fees are increasing by 2% with effect from the 1st of January. There are no proposed increases to car parking charges next year. Bulky and white goods charges, the proposal is to reduce that by 50% for a period of 3 months from the 1st of January next year. And that will be funded from savings in the community skips budget. There'll also be no increase in cemetery and crematorium charges, and the market hall fees have been included in this schedule as well. And the assumed increase in income for next year that's arisen from the increases in income charges is 52,000. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Howard. Any member? B and then Margaret.
It's only for clarification, Howard, and it might be me who just doesn't understand, but on page 221 under number 15, fixed penalty notices, it says including those relating to COVID-19 business restriction offences. Can you give me an example of what that is? I don't...
That's a good question, B.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. They are included in the schedule. They are listed in there, but they're the new charges that have been introduced around the for penalties for businesses that contravene COVID-19 regulations.
All right, because I didn't think that we had any legal. I've had lots of residents say that people aren't going by the COVID restrictions, that they're supposed to be businesses, etc. And what's come back is that we're not allowed to impose anything. It's only a request that people wear masks or the businesses do what they have to do. But it's okay if it's not for now.
I think we have imposed some fines, actually, have we not?
We have, yes.
Yeah, I thought so.
Yeah. Yeah, it's things like if pubs have got people in when they're not supposed to have people in, and parties and stuff like that is where we would be doing it. I just wanted to welcome the fact that we're not putting car parking up, and that will make a difference as far as the town centre is concerned, and also particularly to welcome the not putting the crematorium and the cemetery charges up. I think it would have made the council look absolutely heartless to do that at this point in time. And therefore, I just want to say how glad I am to see that. I've got issues with other bits, but I'm going to save those for later.
Okay.
Okay, any other member?
Yes,
Councillor Johnson, Chair. Councillor Johnson.
Very briefly, Chair, going back to Councillor Foster's point about businesses breaking the COVID restrictions. We've had a couple of absolutely horrendous examples of this. I don't know if anybody read in the press that the police went to the Angel pub that many of you be familiar with, and found people in there, and a whole load more virtually hiding under the landlord's bed. You know, it would make you laugh if it wasn't so serious. And I think the Bridge Inn in Padiham did something similar. And I hate to think how much more of this highly irresponsible behaviour there is out there. And, you know, more part of the elbow of the people are trying to deal with it. Because to me, a lot of the reason that we have this problem, the second wave, was transmission within pubs. I walked into the George IV to watch a football match on Sky. And I expected it all to be social distanced. Not at all. There was a clutch of people sat around the television watching the football. There was a pool match going on. What a surprise that we ended up having to close the pubs again. I actually walked out. I decided that I had better ways of spending my time than in an atmosphere and an environment like that. But I hate to think how much more of this irresponsible behaviour there is out there.
Chair, I'd just like to say that subject to appeal, the Angel has lost its licence for 3 months. And that decision was taken on Friday by a subcommittee of the licensing committee chaired by Councillor Baker.
Well, I'm very pleased to hear that, Jen. I think that three months, quite frankly, you've been very good to them.
Thank you for that information.
It's the maximum, apart from taking it off them forever.
That's how
I'm not getting in a sort of a let's be horrible to them fest, but I think the point's well made.
Howard?
Just regarding the Angel pub thing, we debated for quite a while whether to completely revoke the licence, and it was a toss-up between revoking and suspending. But revocation meant that 2 people would be out of work, the pub would be closed, and for quite a long time. So at the end of the day, I think common sense prevailed, and we just suspended it and gave them one more chance, if you will, to make sure they start obeying the regulations, because otherwise it's just stupid what goes on. Thank you.
I'm going to bring Howard 1 back in a second. Any other members before I do?
No, Chair, none have requested.
Okay. Howard, did you want to come back on that?
No, that's fine, Chair.
You're fine, okay. Actually, it went quite well for a fees and charges in my experience. Can we all give agreement to have noted it? Thank you. Item 16, 2021 Treasury Management Mid-Year Report. Howard 1 again.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this is just to inform members on the Treasury Management activity for the first half of this year. The key items to note in the report are that we're proposing to increase the maximum investment limits with other local authorities from 2 million to 8 million, and similarly increase the money market funds investment from 2 million to 8 million. That's to give us more flexibility in who we can lend to, and that will still fall under the security rules that we follow as part of the policy. That means that we can get better returns on our investments this year. We've also included Burnley College onto the counterparty list shown in Appendix 2, and that follows the council's approval of the £4 million loan back in October. A bit of good news, the Chancellor announced in the spending review that the 1% increase in PWB rates that he'd imposed in October 2019 will be reversed. That has taken place. That took effect from the 26th of November, and the rates have fully gone down by the 1% that we're anticipating. So that would be good news for the schemes like Pioneer Place going forward. The other thing to note is the income from property funds. So they've held up better than expected back in March, where it was predicted that we were looking at receiving around 70% of the investment income compared to previous year. The actual income we got for the first quarter was at 86.7. So we haven't lost much on that at all. It's against the projections. But we'll continue to monitor that over the coming months, and those investments are to be held over the longer term anyway. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Howard. Any member?
No questions received, Chair.
Thank you. Can I take it that we all note the report? Happy with that? Everybody nodding? Thank you very much, Howard.
Thank you.
On to item 17, scrutiny review groups. We just have the one scrutiny review group running at the moment. Councillor Marcus Johnson's chairing it. That's the one that we're looking to the housing stroke Calico. Howard did say that if there was something to report at this time, he'd come back with it. So are you there, Howard? Marcus, sorry.
Yes, Chair. We have had a preliminary meeting. We have drawn up a list of things that we want to talk to Calico about, repairs, the sort of things that you would expect. And there's a meeting going to be set up with the Chief Executive.
Splendid. We'll when the new year comes in, we'll have a look, because I don't want to finish the new year off without tackling something else. So I realise that that review is going on in the background, but perhaps when we get to the first meeting of the year in February, we can perhaps do one. It doesn't matter if it goes over into next year, but if members can be thinking about other things that they'd like to review within the borough, then perhaps we'll just put that on the agenda for February. But in the meantime, wish Marcus well with the progress of his scrutiny review group, and we'll look forward to hearing back from them. Item 18, scrutiny work programme. I had a look at that, and I do think we've got a lot on the agenda in February, and we've also got another meeting in March. So with the committee's agreement, I'll be looking with looking with officers to try to balance those two up a bit. I mean, there are some quite weighty ones, like the Leisure Trust review that's on. The problem is you can't leave things like this because they should have been done a lot earlier in the year. And the farther back you put them, then the more they become baked, if you will. But I shall sit down with officers and see if we can balance those two agendas better. Anybody got any thoughts on item 18?
No one requesting, Chair.
Just a quick one, Chair. Yeah, the Leisure Trust report is for the year ending April this year.
Yes.
So, you know, it's nearly April next year by the time, if we start moving it into March or something.
That won't be moved, I can assure you of that.
Yeah.
Okay. We now go on to the private items.
Yes, thank you, Chair. We just bear with us for